look at that. Okay, well, here's what we got to do. You're going to have to excuse my garage. It's very tiny. It's barely a one-car garage, and it was built for a Model T, and I'm building this car in it. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'm doing the best I can with what I got to work with. But this is what's next on the agenda. I'll show you first what I've done and what I need to do.
This car's been sitting on its side for far too long. It's finally time to put it on its wheels so we can hit the ground running. Now, with every build, there's this struggle between form and function. I'm convinced that both are important. I have seen cars that were complete works of art, lovely, awesome looking vehicles, but functionality was completely ignored. These cars were just miserable to drive at best. But on the other side, I've seen cars that were so completely functional and form was absolutely ignored. And although the car worked well, it was as ugly as homemade sin, and nobody wanted to even be seen in the darn thing. And the results of both extremes is you end up with an expensive pile of scrap metal sitting behind the shop, rotting in the weather, that nobody drives. So my solution is to search for that sweet spot, that place where form meets function, to where you have something that looks really cool, but it's also a joy to drive. I mean, because who's going to want to be miserable behind the wheel just so you can look cool? I mean, that gets old quick. And who wants to be just super comfortable, but everybody pointing at you and going, what in the Sam Hill was he thinking? So first on the agenda is to address the functionality of this vehicle, and we're going to do that with one eye on form.
Yes! I have it on its wheels! Now we can commence building. First of all, I removed the body and the engine and transmission, and I found out that the V8 that was in it was an absolute boat anchor, as you saw in one of my earlier videos. Well, here's the transmission cross member, and that distance has remained the same between there and the rear axle, which is right there. Okay, so that drive shaft should be fine. I'm going to hook the transmission to this, but here's where everything has changed. I added 18 inches to the frame. You see that new metal in there? That's me adding frame. Well, that puts our front cross member 18 inches too far forward. So it's got to come back this way into this void. Well, in order to make it work perfectly, I have my new engine for this car right here. And you can see it still has the motor mounts on it, the ones on the other side too, but I gotta put it in just the right spot. Well, if you take a look right here, you will see that the carburetor appears to be at an angle from the rest of the engine, and it is. So the goal is to set the engine in here in the engine bay, the new engine bay, and make the carburetor level, and thus having the rest of the engine on about a 3-degree tilt or thereabouts. Whatever it ends up being, it doesn't matter, because the transmission is where it is and the engine has got to go where it's got to go. Now this, I'm not even sure this was correct, but it probably was. But regardless, I'm going to unhook those two bolts there and these two bolts here, hook it onto the engine, and then set the engine and transmission and everything in here with the hoist, and get it level, and then make whatever I need to make to have it stay there. Now I know that hanging the engine from the hoist is not going to put it on the front suspension, and so the front suspension is going to drop a little bit. I get that. I expect that. So I'm going to be setting this with about an inch and a half higher than it normally would be. So it'll be a little off so that when we get the weight on it, it should be close enough. And I think it'll work just fine. If you think an inch and a half isn't right, let me know. But that's the plan. That's where we're going next with this, is to get this engine on the hoist and the transmission hooked to it and get it in place so that we can see what we need.
Since this motor's gonna have to repeatedly come in and out of this car, I'm gonna, it's every time I do something, it's gonna require the engine to be out of the way or in there so I can get clearances. So it's just gonna have to come in and out repeatedly. So I'm not putting all the torque converter and everything in there. I just made sure the spacing was all correct. I've got only 4 bolts holding the transmission on. I put the little metal plate in there to get the exact distances and everything, and so now I'm using it like a template. And I'll do a final assembly when I clean up and paint the engine and transmission and make it all pretty. But in the meantime, it's just going to do its job as a template to show us where things have to go.
Right, now to put the bolt in. Alright, now the transmission is in place, and we got to get a level and put it on the carburetor. See how that's going to work. Alright, let's see how the level is here. Okay, I'm just on the high side of the bubble. So I'm thinking that once the weight of the engine is on the frame, it's going to come down enough to level it out. What do you think? I don't know, I think I'm in the right place. Alright, so the next thing I need to do now that I have the engine where I want it, I have to make sure that it is centered this way in the engine bay, which it is not, I don't believe. And then I have to attach this cross member to the motor mounts. And then tomorrow I'm going to go into town and get some metal so that I can make brackets from here to the cross member location. And then this engine will be right where it goes. I think this is awesome. I'm pretty happy with this.